Hello and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. Those of you that have listened for any length of time here are familiar with my notion of capitalism, which I call compassionate capitalism. And the idea behind compassionate capitalism is pretty basic. I mean, it's actually foundational, I think, to life in general, which is that everything is connected. And businesses that are actually operating from the premise that everything that we do as a business touches something, and we need to be curating that touch as effectively as we can. Now, that's an outward-looking view. On the inward side, the question becomes, how do we actually achieve that? That has to do with, I think, the major operating component in almost every business, which are teams. And highly effective teams can generate some incredible results if the situation and the environment and the context and the structure kind of allows for it. So with that being said, and that was kind of a setup, I want to introduce Charlie Gilkey, who is my guest today. Charlie's got a fascinating book out that's called Team Habits: How Small Actions Lead to Extraordinary Results. And it basically shows how changing your team's habits in the most effective, enduring way to improve team performance and belonging actually generates the kind of results that, for me, I'm looking for as a compassionate capitalist. Charlie and I had a couple of conversations before actually jumping into today's episode. And I'm just very thrilled and very excited and very pleased to welcome you, Charlie. Looking forward to the conversation.
Blaine, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it as well. And, the thing about it is I might be jumping ahead on this one, Blaine, but the way that you explain compassionate capitalism is a really useful frame for how we need to think about teams as a system as well. Like, it's connected to so many different people. And I think so much of the time when we talk about teamwork or we talk about business, we forget that it's those invisible connections. It's kind of the dark matter of business that actually makes the business work, makes the organization work. So I'm so excited we get to talk about that.
Yeah, I've got a way of kind of illustrating that for myself and the clients with whom I work. And I know that this may or may not, but I got a hunch it probably is. Part of your company, which, by the way, is called Productive Flourishing, which is a coaching and training company that Charlie founded some years ago. But the idea of productive flourishing, for me, all any relationship is a collection of people that are in relationship. Mm-hmm. That's all any company is. That's all any business is, any organization is, collection of people in relationship. And the tip of the iceberg there is obviously the most visible one, which is the interpersonal dynamics, the interpersonal, my relationship with you, my relationship with my boss, whatever. But we also have relationship with intangibles. And I love the way that you phrased the dark matter component. These relational pieces are actually the dark matter that comprise the huge body of what the organization is actually composed of. So I'm going to just launch with a question here, that I've kind of teed you up with here a little bit. But I do want to use it as kind of an opening salvo into just really understanding, from your perspective and basically what you write about in Team Habits, what is that dark matter? So the question here, and those of you that have listened for a while are familiar with this question, when you hear the term the soul of business, what does that evoke for you?
I love that because for me, it invokes the idea that a business is a living organization or living organism in a way, right? It has a way that it wants to live and breathe. And I know it's weird to talk about collections and inanimate objects having wheels and things like that, but it's a useful frame because time and time again, what we see is when a business is thriving, it's closest to its soul or its way of being and how it wants to be in the world. And when it's starting to struggle, it's usually because we're placing external demands on it, right? Or it's out of alignment with that. So it has me do, like, because of my work and things like that, it either has me thinking of either, like a cell organism, right? Or it actually has me think more of a forest, because I think forests can have souls in the same way that we're talking about right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I did a TED talk a couple of years ago, I guess it was. Nature is the ultimate business guru. And one of the metaphors I organized around was a boreal forest. Yeah. And I've got one. Yeah. I'll live on 11 acres up here on the island. Mm-hmm. And just walking the forest, I mean, it just teems with invisible life. I mean, and I say invisible because a lot of it's underground. When you get into the mycelium network that connects all of the roots, the root systems in this forest, it's fascinating. And that is not a bad metaphor, I think, for how many organizations are put together. There's a lot that's underground that serves as the communication conduit, not the word verbiage communication, but the unspoken communication that actually informs that dark matter. I'll just start with this. The idea of team habits, which is the marquee title of your book here. What was the catalyst for writing that? We'll just start with that, and then we'll unbundle it a little bit here. But what was the catalyst for writing it?
So, as you were explaining the mycelium network, and now we're talking about, so it's like, we only have 30 minutes, Blaine? Okay, I'll try to be brief here. So my previous book is Start Finishing, right? That's the name of the book. Yeah. And I knew when I started writing Start Finishing that it was a part of at least a 3-book arc, right? Just I knew from the gate. So one was just about how do we do our own best work? And that's what Start Finishing really addressed. But as I was out talking about team habits or talking about Start Finishing, I would get that question, Blaine. And it's an inevitable question, be like, Charlie, what you're talking about in this book, we really believe in it. It's great. But like, how do we get senior leadership? How do we get executives to buy off on focus blocks, which are 90 to 120 minute blocks of time, where you can just focus on the work and do that sort of, what my colleague Cal Newport calls deep work. Mm-hmm. Blaine, I'd always say, so what you're telling me is, let me get this right, because it was always a manager that asked this question, right? So what you're telling me is, you and your team can't collectively figure out how to cover for each other or just find ways to be off the communication grid for three focus blocks per week. You're saying you need senior management and senior leadership to get involved in that. And the deer in the headlight look would always come in and be like, oh, no, well, we don't. And so what it came down to in the language that I would use now is like, you all are operating in a way, you're agreeing to operate in a way, right? And if you're looking at collective action, which is what teamwork is, what we need to do is change those often unconscious commitments that you have with each other, mm-hmm. and say, hey, we can do things differently here right now. And so that was sort of the genesis of it. And the more I talked about it, I was like, look, it's just like a habit. It's just like, and I was like, well, it isn't like a habit. It is a habit. It's a team habit, mm-hmm. right? It's what we collectively decide to do as a team that oftentimes it's not a conscious decision, right? So it's like, I'll pick on meetings real quick because everybody understands meetings as a team habit. And it's a very easy whipping boy, right? And it's like, oh, our team meeting culture sucks. Well, no. Let's unpack that. Yeah. If Blaine, Charlie, Mark, Amy, and Taylor are all on a team, and we have a meeting that's terrible, we did that to each other, right? We can do something differently. We unconsciously agreed that that's how we were going to do things. We could decide to keep doing it that way, or we could respect that connection, that relationship, and I can go to Blaine and be like, Blaine, did you like that meeting? Did that work for you? And we might figure it out it's not working for us all. And I want to say here at the team level, which is what I'm talking about, the 4 to 8 people that you spend 80% of your time working with, even your team leader or your manager is a part of that team. And we forget to enroll them and consider that. It's like, oh, well, the manager makes us do it this way. It's like, have you actually gone to your manager? Have you said, hey, Ann, like, I have some ideas about what we can do that I'm willing to own, that I'm willing to try. I'm willing to hold the agenda. I'm willing to facilitate the meeting. I just want to see if this have you tried that and approached your manager as a teammate? And so that's where team habits came from, because I was like, look, the thing about it is these are activities we're deciding to do together. We might not consciously be saying, let's do it that way. But the other important piece, Blaine, is that you're either participating in bad team habits or you're working towards better team habits. Because every time you do a bad team habit, you reinforce it in the same way that you reinforce your personal bad habits, right? So there's team status quo and team change. Like, you got to choose which one you're going to be on, right? And I know that's going to frustrate and piss a lot of people off, but it's actually the truth.
It is. One of the, anybody that's watching this, rather than just listening to it, has been seeing me with my head down. I'm scribbling notes all over the place right now. There's a couple, let's just unbundle this a little bit here. Most teams are organized around the achievement of a result. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we come together, and the objective that we identify for ourselves out there in the future is that result. Now, there's a distinction to be made, I think, in a communication context between having conversations about the result and having conversations about the conditions of satisfaction that contribute to the experience of that result being well attained. Mm-hmm. The conditions of satisfaction almost never are broached. And as a consequence, everything is focused on, well, we missed a deadline, or who didn't do what, and so finger pointing comes into play, blame starts to appear, and all that kind of stuff. Now, assuming that premise, in the work that you do with your clients, and actually, what's in the book itself, where does conditions, the articulation of conditions of satisfaction come into play, so that at the end of the day, when we say we're done, here's the deliverable, you're going to have a high degree of certainty that people are going to be satisfied with it? Where does that come into play? How does that work? It comes
into play, and I love that question. I'm going to suggest a friendly amendment. Mm-hmm. Teams are formed because there are some goals that are explicitly stated. There are some outcomes that are explicitly stated, and then there are others that are implicitly agreed to. Mm-hmm. And so what you're talking about, the conditions for success and things like that, are those implicit conditions.
Right.
Right. And so for me, it starts to become, there are 8 categories of team habits, if you will, and I can break them all down. But specifically what you're asking is a goal setting and prioritization team habit, right? That's one kind of team habit where we say, okay, yes, we are trying to create this deliverable, and there are these other things that we're trying to do. So we're trying to create this deliverable, but we're also trying to break single points of failure dependencies. So Charlie always does this thing. And we know as a team, if we always have Charlie do that thing, we might get an outcome, but he's the only person that does that. So what we're doing is creating a more fragile team. Mm-hmm. So we're going to try to get that outcome, but this time we're going to tag Blaine in, right? And we're consciously building that cross functionality. Also, we are doing this during a very volatile, uncertain period in our economy and in our world like that. We also want to achieve that one without burning people out or without overtaxing people or whatever that is. And we can put those on the table of just things that are part of the conditions that are become part of that dark matter, right? So like, if it's that moment where Charlie's sitting there and he's like, okay, we got to get this done by Friday. Are y'all doing it? I could, as a teammate, jump in and just get it done. And the deliverable might happen, but we didn't actually meet the criteria for success there, because I did it because I broke the rule that Blaine was in the seat, and we're trying to build cross-team functionality and readiness on that one. So that becomes part of the goal setting process, where we try, like one of the rules, this is actually in my next book coming up, but one of the fundamental things that I push on teammates and leaders all the time is it's an acronym. I've got an Army background, so it's MTOE.
Say that again.
MTOE.
TOE.
Now MTO.
MTO, yes.
Make the obvious explicit. Because when you make the obvious explicit, you realize it wasn't obvious. Right? And then good conversations can be had for that. Now, that may not resonate with a lot of people about some of those other sort of implicit goals that I slid in there. But when we think about what it means to be in a high-performing team, one of the and to want to be in that type of team, one of the implicit goals is actually to have a high sense of belonging and rapport, right? Team habits. Belong is one of those kinds of team habits that I actually lead the book with. Because it turns out if you have a team with high belonging, they can come together and solve a lot of problems. They can come together and have each other back. But we don't often state, in the language that you said, like we need this outcome. We just need this outcome, Charlie. Like just go make this thing happen. Okay, that might be true that we needed that outcome, but implicitly it's create that outcome without pissing your teammates off. Right, without all these other sort of things that are actually a part of it. And so I just want to make sure that we're amplifying that how we do what we do matters, not just what we do. We can choose to push for an outcome and put a point on the board no matter the cost. Or we can choose to say, you know what? We are connected. And the reality is, I would like to have this job for the next 6 months or a year or 2 years or 3 years. Turns out, jobs where we're in great relationships with other people, where we can trust each other, we have high belonging, we know we're not going to screw each other over, like those types of things, make work better.
Hi, I'd like to ask you to do something for me if you wouldn't mind. If you like this episode, I'd like you to not only subscribe on your favorite site, but I'd also like you to give a rating. Ideally, a 5-star rating would be greatly appreciated. But I think more importantly also would be just some comments. That helps with the algorithm and it helps build the audience with this. And more than anything else, if you could invite somebody else to listen, just share this episode with a friend, with a colleague. And I'd like to see how we can grow the soul of business. I think it makes a difference. Thanks. The IMTO, make the obvious explicit. One of the models I work with, and we talked about this a little bit, but it addresses that whole dark matter component. The acronym that we've worked with is the background of the boo. The blinding obvious. The background of the obvious, the boo, background of the obvious. And until it's made explicit,
exactly.
Siri doesn't know what I'm talking about here. Never mind. Okay. That's interesting. Always listening. Background of the obvious. But until we can make that explicit, this is where we end up tripping ourselves up. We are meaning-making machines, as far as I can tell. All human beings tend, all movement is a function of the meaning that I generated around the situation or what's been asked of me. And I behave in ways that are meaningful. So somebody that can control the meaning will actually control the movement, in the organization. Making the background of the obvious, or making this, the obvious explicit, is one way that we avoid the meaning in this meaning field, the little mines that will explode on us if we're not careful. How do you actually go about making the obvious explicit? Because oftentimes it may be obvious, but it's not recognized.
So in some ways, it's reminding yourself and other people that, like, we are dynamic, organic beings that are evolving in space and time. And I know that's important, but like the people that you're talking to today may not remember what you talked about 3 months ago. May not remember what you talked about, or they may not have been in the room. Like, we are chronically bad about remembering who was a part of what conversation. Right? And so part of it is just having the grace and compassion to not assume that everyone remembers and knows what you know. Right? Not to assume those types of things, but also I think, and Blaine, I'm going to keep saying at the team level, and this is an important point, because with your team, you typically have a good rapport with them, and their tells, their micro expressions. Like, it's like, Blaine is showing a little bit of hesitation on that one. So something is not translating on this one. So I need to pause and be like, hey, so I just want to make sure that we're still aligned on this point, right? This is where I'm coming from are you tracking that too? Right. And it's like, oh, I completely forgot about that piece. Like we've always done it this way. And we said this time we're going to do it differently. So I was stuck in the moment. Right. And it's not treating Blaine like an idiot. It's just treating Blaine like he's a person who may not remember that. Right. And so I think more, especially if you're in a leadership perspective, more leaders need to be explaining the why and the dark matter behind things and get the hell out of the how business. Right. They spend so much time in the how because they don't explain the why and they don't explain what they're doing on that side of things. And so from that leadership perspective, it's whenever you're kicking off a new project or whenever things are getting stuck or whenever, you're needing to give that moment of motivation. And I'm not talking about the negative sort of thing, but it's like you need to rally your team, right? It's super easy for teams to get project locked and task locked, right? And to say, hey, let's pause. I know we have to hit that deadline by Friday. I really get that, right? But let's just take a moment and remember that, like, when we complete this, our customers will be better off. When we complete this sort of thing, then like maybe we get out of just a little bit more project debt, right? Or maybe this is our time to show and trust each other that we can do this sort of thing. So yes, I know we got to get the thing done, but this has a higher purpose, right?
Meaning.
It has a higher meaning to that. And that's the thing about team habits that's really important to us to consider is that, and it's going to sound obvious, but my deal, make the obvious explicit. Any team action is a social action, which means there's inherently meaning maneuvering happening in there. So I might continue to do a team habit, and it might be a bad and terrible team habit, not because I think that team habit is the best way to get to the outcome, but because I want to stay in good relationships with the humans around me.
Spot on.
My behavior is expressing the value of being connected to something other than the outcome. Right. And that's sometimes why we end up with what I call broken printers, which are just the idea that, like, in every organization that I've ever worked at or consulted with, there's at least one broken printer that everyone knows about. Right. And it's not a problem until it's a problem. Right. And because we're on a timeline, everyone knows what I mean on that. And it's not, I use that as a metaphor because, there's all sorts of broken printers, whether it's people who can't, thread on a Slack or who can't reply on a Slack thread to save their life, or always gives their file permissions wrong, or always talks too long during meetings, right? Whatever that is, there's always one, right? Sometimes we let the broken printer exist because trying to change it may upset a social status quo that is more important to us to maintain that and express our value in relationship by doing something that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, what you're talking about here in part, Charlie, has to do with we get committed to certain, what am I committed to? Well, the objective commitment would be the goal, the objective, all that kind of stuff. But oftentimes people get committed to the status quo without recognizing that they've kind of bought it, they've drunk the Kool-Aid, so to speak here. And what ends up transpiring as a lingua franca, as the way that we actually conduct our business, is a cordial hypocrisy. We know that it's broken, but I want to go along to get along. So I don't rock the boat, don't call it out. And a lot of it has to do, in my experience, with people not recognizing or not actually experiencing that they have the skill set necessary to call it out without having their head handed to them. And I'm fascinated by your background as an Army, logistics officer, because there had to have been, in that whole logistics change, all kinds of opportunities for breakdowns. And the Army is absolutely, in my experience, again, minimal as it is, I certainly wasn't in the role that you were, but the U.S. Army, the U.S. military is phenomenally good at logistical controls. I mean, just amazing. That's the key to success.
Correct.
So again, I'm kind of coming back to here this notion of cordial hypocrisy. I'm unconsciously committed to a status quo. I don't rock the boat. As a consequence, we don't get anywhere near the kind of performance that we could get if we had people that were actually organizing around excellence.
Yeah, I'm glad you used that word, because in that scenario, I'll use my background, through my service and things like that. In the Army setting, obviously you have high stakes missions, right? If you screw up, people actually can die, and you lose a lot of money, right, in the process. But you're more committed to excellence and character than you are to, unless people are going to die and it's unsafe, particular outcomes. And so if your buddy is over there and they're doing something that they know is wrong and you know is wrong, it is more important for you to go to your buddy and be like, hey, I'll use the civilian language, like, fix that, right? Stop, fix that, right?
Yeah.
And there's no sort of like, how dare you? It's like, oh man, I'm damn, right? You caught me. Because we're more committed to being the best than we are to being comfortable.
Yeah.
Right. And I was talking to one of my clients about this, because what they're going through. And I was like, in some organizations, the cost of comfort is way too high. Way, way too high. Right. And it's not the type of company you're talking about. It's a nonprofit that's got a lot of diverse folks in it. And it's like, we've gotten too comfortable in our role, and we actually need to start focusing on excellence and the mission, and we have to make that shift. And I'm like, well, that means we're going to have to be uncomfortable. We're going to have some of these conversations and hear more. But again, if Blaine and I are in a team together and we consciously have decided, because part of our goals, to your point, is to be better than we were last time, and we're going to make that explicit, right? If Blaine, or I'll put myself on it, if Charlie is doing something that's not helping us get there, it's not Blaine attacking me. It's Blaine reminding me of this shared goal.
Yeah.
Right. And saying, okay, in this moment, I have a choice. Am I going to renege on what we agreed to? Or am I going to change course with support of a friend helping me do that? Right. And we can do that in our teams. Because again, I want to mention getting your head chopped off. Yes, if you're walking up to the CEO of your organization, you got 82 things that you want to fix, and you got a very strong agenda, that's probably not going to go well, right? But if you focus at the team level, Blaine, Charlie, Mark, Taylor, Amy, and you're like, hey, this broken printer, I think it frustrates us all, right? Like, are we open to trying something different and better? And we might not, our first thing that we try may not be the best thing. That's fine. But we're open to the experiment in excellence. We're open to going that direction, which means we're not going to be excellent when we start, right? We're gonna is going to be uncomfortable. Turns out it sucks to suck, and most humans don't want to do it, right? So we'd rather be like, oh, this is comfortable, and I know how to do it, and I'm good at it, so I'm going to stick with it. Yeah. As opposed to being like, I'm consciously going to choose to, like, I know everybody been talking about AI. It's uncomfortable and scary, but I'm going to choose to use it and be bad at it, so that as an individual, I can get good at it, so that as a team, we can get great at it.
Yeah. And that notion of being uncomfortable, I mean, the human organism doesn't appreciate discomfort. We default towards anything that, chocolate or whatever it is that makes us comfortable. But there's no growth in that. We do not grow. I want to, the idea of you talked about, I've got a friend, getting a friend to work with me, that kind of, just to help us move to that next level. This notion of interdependence comes into play here. Some teams do not have, in the structure of their organizing or in their way of working, a high degree of native interdependence amongst the different team members. I mean, I can slip a pizza under the door, I'll do my deal, and I'll give you the end result. You take that end result and you go run with it and see where we're at. Without interdependence, do we really have a team?
Well, I was going to push on that, because what you described was a group.
That's exactly what my point would be. There's a distinction between a group and a team.
There's a big difference between that. And so the less you have belonging, the less you have some of the, other 7 to 8 team habits that you're conscious about, the more you have a group of people, right? And the more that you have those where it's like, I know folks who are in larger organizations might bristle at this statement because it's been used against them, but it's like, that's what we do here, or that's just how we do it.
Yes.
There's a very crippling, pervasive way in which that's used. But when you look at actually high belonging, high performance teams, they will say it and mean something differently. Like if you work with the 101st or the 82nd, those are both elite, units, or they're Army Rangers or things like that.
Right.
There is very clearly that's how we do it here, right?
Yep.
With pride and gusto and commitment, right? That is how we do it here, and it's meant to be a positive way. So if you're over there screwing up, that's not how we do this here, right? This is what we do. Now, even in those structures, people think it's hierarchical and you can't change that. Like if you say, hey, that's true, but I'm trying it this way and look at what outcome happens. And let me show you that this might actually be a better way. If it is actually better, guess what? That's how we do things here now, right? We are going to train and adopt that, but it's not just the personality of like, oh, I just want to do things a little bit different. It's like, no one cares about that. You want to do it differently. Like even to the degree, and I know we're running short on time, but like even to the way that you load out your tactical gear so that everybody's canteen or everybody's water thing is on the right side, right? Or everybody's ammo is in the same place. Why does everybody have to be so conformed? Well, it turns out in a combat zone, if somebody goes down, you don't have to figure out their particular loadout and where their ammo might be. Right. You need to reach for it and go, right? The organization is designed for that, right? So you need to play ball. Like we don't all get to choose what civilian vehicle we want to drive because we need to be able to drive all the vehicles and know that people can drive those vehicles. So yes, those are extreme examples. And strong civilian teams have that same sort of way. When you look at them, there's a way they do it. There's a way they send their emails to each other. There's a way they create their PowerPoint presentations. There's a way they take radical care of each other. That's what it means to be a part of that team.
Yeah, I love it. Folks, Charlie Gilkey, the book is Team Habits, How Small Actions Lead to Extraordinary Results. His previous book, and there's an arc here that he's actually developing, the third book he's working on right now. But the initial book was called Start Finishing. And I love that title, Start Finishing, How to Go From Idea to Done. And what's interesting about that particular book is it was a top 10 business and economic book. And it was a winner of the Eric Hoffer Grand Prize in 2020. It's an extraordinary book. Both of these are well worth picking up. Where can people find out more about what you're up to, Charlie, and also what your firm is?
So all roads lead back to productiveflourishing.com. And so if you're curious about either my work on teamwork or leadership or personal productivity, productiveflourishing.com. I'm also regularly active on LinkedIn at Charlie Gilkey. And so those would be the two places, the easiest places to start. Love to hear from you. If you have any questions, I'd love to field those as well.
Great. Again, thank you for spending a half an hour with me. I've greatly appreciated it. It's been a fascinating conversation. I'd love to have you back. We've got a couple of other shows that we do. Maybe get you on the office hour show with my good buddy, David Meltzer. We just signed a deal. I'm chancellor now of the Napoleon Hill Institute. We've got a lot of work that we're doing there. So folks, as you're listening, my admonition to you is find a way in your life to become a center of distribution, not a center of accumulation. Nature works best when things are being given away. And I think that's the challenge and the charge that I'm going to leave you with. Find ways to give things away, give knowledge away, give a hug away, give a smile away. You're going to find your life works a whole lot better. Charlie, thanks again. And folks, we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.
Thanks so much for having me.